All right. Well, thank you to our attendees. Hopefully you can all hear me. Everything's good. Welcome to our budget consultation on the 2022 City of Ottawa budget. I'm joined by my co-host this evening, George Darouze, Councillor for Osgoode Ward. Obviously, ever since George was elected, long time ago, back in 2014, we've done these ward budget consultations together. Obviously, the last 2 years, we've done them virtually. And joining us here today is Wendy Stephenson, who is our actually, she's our CFO, but runs all the treasury stuff and like that. Her and Isabel are just kicking ass over there. So we're going to start with a presentation. So Wendy has a presentation to walk through, and then we'll go through any questions or comments that members of the public might have for us. And if you check your screen, you have the ability to put questions into the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen, as well as the chat. So it's up to you. I'll monitor both, and we'll make sure all questions are answered by the end of the meeting tonight. And then we'll be posting this meeting online. So I'm recording it, and then we'll post it online. So Councillor Darouze and I can share it through our various channels so that people can consume it afterwards for those who weren't able to attend tonight. So Wendy, George, do you want to make any comments?
Oh, no, thank you very much, Scott. I really appreciate the collaboration that, we've been doing those meetings together since I got elected, and I find them they're very, because both our ward have similar issues, and in the budget, I think it could keep our community together for them to put a comment and understand what is their input. So I want to thank Wendy for making the time tonight for us, for our community. And I want to thank all the attendees that they took time also from their time, your staff and my staff, for putting all this together. So thank you very much.
Thanks. And people might not know this, but my ward is actually twice the size of Osgoode Ward, which means I get twice the salary.
I have more people.
All right, Wendy, go ahead.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to share my screen. So just bear with me here. And if you can confirm that you can see this, that would be great.
I certainly can.
Perfect. Okay. I will just put it in slideshow mode. And here we go. Awesome. So thanks very much for having me here this evening. As Councillor Moffatt said, is this working? Can you see my slideshow?
Yeah, you're just in screen mode. You're not in.
Okay, here we go.
Now you're in presentation mode. It's buffering.
I'm actually I'm laughing because I'm at a city facility here, and it's buffering. So I haven't joined you in the rural area yet, but you're all having the same experience. So as it buffers, as Councillor Moffatt said, my name is Wendy Stephenson. I'm the CFO here at the City of Ottawa, and my team's responsible for putting the budget together for the entire city. So tonight I'm going to give you a short overview of the city's budget, its composition, the budget process, and ways that you can provide input into that process. And something's not working here, but I'll just keep it as it is, if that's okay. I know it's not ideal. In terms of developing the operating budget, we have an overarching framework for determining how much needs to be collected from taxes to pay the cities. And we can work backwards from a tax target or build up to that number, but really it's best for us to start with that target and make sure that our budgets remain affordable. And the city must estimate and determine any increase in expenditures resulting from inflation or increases from collective agreements or changes to regulation or legislation, growth to service in new neighborhoods, and changes in funding from other levels of government. When we look at all of those impacts, then we look at the offset in terms of savings that we have from efficiencies that can be achieved in our operations, or increases in revenues from fees that are charged directly to our users of city services, and taxes from new assessments that particularly help pay for increased operating infrastructure costs to service our new neighborhoods. And this year, I'm going to say a little bit like last year, we have to consider any additional budget pressures that we have as we continue to operate in the COVID pandemic environment. And I actually calling it a little bit of the COVID hangover as we flow into 2022. So we have to take those impacts into consideration as we're building our budget for 2022. So if we look here, this is a bit of a snapshot in terms of 2021 and our operational budget. It was $3.94 billion. And about 60% of that budget is made up of 4 key services: water and sewer, police, transit, community and social services. And much of the revenue from these services come from sources other than tax. So a lot of them are user pay, such as water and sewer. It's paid for revenue from the water bill. And half of transit operating costs are paid by fare revenue, and over 80% of our community and social services are paid for by provincial and federal funding. And about 14% of our operating budget goes towards, just lost my lights here. They went off a little bit early. Just a second, get my flashlight on. Yeah, so roughly 14% of our operating budget goes towards capital cash reserves to help pay for infrastructure renewal and growth in our tax and rate budgets. And then the remaining 32% of the budget covers other services that are delivered by the city.
You can go for a walk if you want.
I'll survive. I'll finish the presentation.
Your face is fairly whited out.
Is it? Oh, that's a good thing. Okay. My apologies. So if we look at the total revenues, you can see that just over 50% of our revenue comes from taxes and payment in lieu of taxes, which are basically funds that come from the federal government. They pay what they call payment in lieu of taxes for their properties that they have here in the city. And another 21% comes from federal and provincial grants, and 22% from fees and charges, such as our water bill, our transit fares, and our parks and recreational fees. And this slide shows a snapshot of our capital program from 2021. So our capital budget was approximately $781 million. And we have some high asset intensive areas that primarily our water and sewer services, transit and transportation, which includes our roads portion. And 60% of the capital budget for tax supported services is for the renewal or replacement of our aging infrastructure. And on the rate side for water and sewer and stormwater, and 91% is for renewal of assets. The remainder is for growth, which is primarily funded by development charges. And there's a small number of projects identified for regulatory or strategic initiatives. What's not included in this total is projects of strategic importance. So I think about things that are approved outside of the budgeting process that require a separate or a special report and approval from council. So a couple of examples of that would be our light rail, and the second would be the central library. And this slide just shows the capital program by funding source. So here you can see that 64% of the capital funding comes from the cash reserves that we put aside every year for capital contribution from the operating budget. And the remainder of the capital program is largely funded by debt or funding from other levels of government and development charges. And this slide just provides an overview in terms of the expenditure discretion that we have here at the city. And you can see really that there's little discretion that the city has to reduce spending on many of the city services. The police budget's tabled separately. Council doesn't have discretion to make any line item changes to that budget. They can only approve or reject the budget in its entirety. And budget reductions in other areas like transit or fire or paramedics and roads have to be accompanied by changes in service standards that the city offers and are council approved. There's also a long list of services or expenditures where there's no discretion because these services are mandated or they're regulated, such as our long-term care, our public health, our housing, and our debt charges. There's a little bit more discretion in areas funded by fees, where the fees can be increased to recover the cost of delivering that service, or in areas where there are no specific service standards or for administrative services. So back in July, Council approved the budget directions for 2022, which are summarized on this slide. And you'll see that we set a municipal tax target at 3% overall. 2.6 is the citywide levy. Ottawa Police Services has a levy of 3% increase, and the transit levy will be set at 4.5%. Any additional taxation revenues from growth, which is currently forecasted at 1.4%. We'll also see an increase to our rate program, so that's water and sewer, with an overall average increase of 4.86, which is in alignment with our long-range financial plan for water, wastewater, and stormwater. User fees and charges increase in accordance with the fiscal framework or the long-range financial plan, including some of our incremental COVID-19 cost recovery items. And the capital budget will be developed in accordance with the direction that's outlined in our DC background study from 2019, our long-range financial plan, as well as our fiscal framework. So this slide just shows the process and the timing with respect to the budget. So as I said, the budget directions were approved in July, and public consultations are taking place throughout October. All of our budgets are going to be tabled with council, including the various boards and commissions, on November the 3rd. And from that date to December the 8th, the individual budgets for each committee and board and commissions are reviewed, discussed, and debated. It's at these meetings that the public has another opportunity to provide feedback and input on the budget via public delegations. And then the budget is approved by the Committee of the Whole and Council on December the 8th. And final approval of any recommendations would be made on December 8th by Council. And this slide just shows all of the various budget meeting schedules for all of the committees where public delegations can be made, and you can provide input into the recommendations that are before each committee. And this list can be found on the city's website, and it's updated if there's any changes that are made to that date. And there's several resources available to you that you can provide input on the budget throughout the year. Engage Ottawa provides a comprehensive online engagement platform that allows you to connect with the city in an interactive manner. And to provide any input, you can complete our online survey or send comments via Engaged Ottawa, or contact your councillor and provide feedback. You can also get additional information on the city's website at ottawa.ca/budget. And we appreciate the feedback. It's all reviewed and considered. And I want to thank everybody for being here tonight and your participation in the public meeting. I certainly look forward to hearing your priorities, and also look forward to any ideas you might have with respect to saving money. And I'll just hand it back to you, councillors. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Appreciate you taking the time to present and be here today after a long day on council. Just pulling something on my screen here. Well,
there we go.
Did you want to go turn your lights on yet or no?
I will. Yes, thank you. I'll be back in a second.
All right. So this is opportunity. George, did you want to make any comments following that, or do you want to go straight to questions?
No. As usual, Wendy did a great presentation, and I know that the public knows the process. So let's give them some time for us their questions so we can answer it, and then we'll go from there. Thanks, Scott.
So hold on, let me bring my screen back up here. All right. So we did have a question already. And the question is, well, I'll wait till Wendy comes back because I want her to be able to hear it. It's on policing to a degree. It's also on social services. For anyone who has any questions, like I said, you can raise them in the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little Q&A box, and then also the chat box. So happy to take questions in either one. And your name is not seen, so it's we know who's asking the question, but for the most part it's anonymous, so it doesn't go out, doesn't get broadcast publicly. So Wendy, we have a couple questions. I just wanted to make sure that you were back for that, just in case that you can provide some input on them as well. The first question, it's premised on, I read the report released yesterday from the Coalition of Community Health and Resource Centers, Rethinking Community Safety. It gives a wide range of opportunities that Ottawa City Council can pursue to better apply existing spending to improve community safety. My question is, do you think the continued increases to the policing budget and current model of policing is working? So I was supposed to have a meeting to talk about the police budget with the police last week, but they had to cancel it. I think it was the day after the Russell Avenue situation. So it was with the Deputy Chief, Steve Bell. So I haven't had a chance to talk to him. We spoke earlier in the summer about their budget. That was before they came out with the reports to the Police Services Board, looking at 3 options: a 0%, a 1.5, and I think a 3. I don't know if they've settled on one yet, and I don't know if they've finalized or presented that budget yet. Wendy, do you have any comments on that?
And my understanding, councillors, they're going to bring their budget back, and any increase over that 0% has to be defended when they place the budget on the table. So I think they're starting with 0, and then when they table their budget, you'll see if there's any increases. They will be talking about what those look like.
Yeah, and I know that, the question is, the current model of policing is working. I don't know if you're going to get a lot of disagreement that it's not working the way we'd want it to. I think we all want to see change in policing. I think we've talked about this a lot. This came up at council not too long ago when we were talking about budget directions. I made a comment that, in order to see the change that we want in our police services and how policing is carried out and crime prevention, it's going to take 10 years of reform and of different changes, because things can't happen overnight. And I think one of the comments that got back to me was, how can you expect to wait 10 years for that? We need it now. But I think we have the right people in place at Ottawa Police. I know our police chief, Peter Slowly, is on board with making these changes. I know, like I said, I've been meeting with Steve Bell, the deputy chief, and I know he certainly understands the challenges that we're seeing in the community, the concerns that certain community members have with not feeling that they can feel safe around our police. So these are all things that need changing. I think we often have an odd balance, though, because we also get a lot of comments from constituents that they want more policing. They want to see policing more often. They want to see better enforcement. But so I think Ottawa Police has a balancing act to do with some of that, with what we hear from the public, but then what we hear from other parts of the public, other sectors of the public as well. So I don't have a perfect answer for you right now, but I do expect that there'll be some decent conversation on this when the Police Services Board does meet again, and then they present their budget. Now, it's important to note, City Council cannot go through a police budget line by line. We don't have that authority. We can either say yes or we can say no. If we say no, in Ontario, the police service have their own appeal authority that they can appeal their budget to. So it's an interesting arrangement in Ontario. Councillor Darouze, do you have any comments on that question specifically?
I think you covered it all, and I did speak to some of my community, and I know that in the rural area we're really in support of policing, because as much as the city of Ottawa, geographically there's a lot of challenge. Specifically, our community need more policing. We have more speed. We get more complaint day after day about speeding in our community, and with COVID, people working from home, so people seeing more speeding in the community, and we need more boots on the ground. So I did some consultation with my community in Osgoode Ward Advisory Board, and I know that we're in full support of the police budget, because we can't really afford to have less policing than what we have right now.
All right, thanks. And I haven't seen that Rethinking Community Safety report yet, so I would, I don't know if I have that, but if you want to be able to reach out to me and share that with me, I'd have no problem reviewing that, because I haven't seen it yet myself. Thanks. And there's other things to policing too. Community safety is a lot bigger than just policing. It's how we develop our city. It's some of the things that we do. I know Ottawa Community Housing, through our Rochester Heights development, through Gladstone Village, it's about integrating multiple communities together and not just, lumping people in groups across the city and expecting them to thrive, yet we don't give them the tools and resources to thrive. So it's a lot how we plan our city too, and how we provide resources for individuals to succeed. Next question, I might bounce around because I've got a question in the chat and questions in the Q&A, but I will get to them all. Next question is, how will the new official plan affect or change the proposed budget? So the official plan itself doesn't have a direct impact on the annual budget. There's no question that some of the decisions that we make on planning, on growth, can have impacts. Our growth is generally supposed to be defined as growth pays for growth. We know that doesn't always work out. We try to manage that through development charges and whatnot, but ultimately the official plan itself would not have a direct annual impact on the proposed budget. It's just not that, it's not that type of document. I don't know, Wendy, do you want to touch on that a bit?
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Councillor. Typically, growth does pay for growth. So when I talked about development charges, the development charges are collected basically through the builders for development and fund all of the projects associated with that. You get some, I'm going to say, small percentages in terms of the city and the tax kind of budget having to support it, where there's an existing to the benefit existing community. But generally, I agree with you, Councillor, like growth pays for growth.
Okay, so there was a question here to put the slides back up on the screen. I don't know pertaining to what, so if you're asking to put the slides back up on the screen, we'll do that. If you can let me know what you want to look at in particular, but I will use the slides as well to help with the next question. So if you could put that back up and go to the pie chart on revenues and expenditures. Sorry, the two pies on revenues and expenditures, if you could. Those are always helpful graphs. I use them in all my town hall meetings too, because they illustrate well some of where the money's coming from, where it's going. All right, so yeah, so right here, go to the previous slide, which is on expenditures. So the question was on the community social services, what percentage is coming from the provincial and federal government? So if you look at this slide, so you see the community social services at $749 million, and 18.9%, which you referenced in your question. If you go to the next slide on revenues, you'll see here federal and provincial municipal grant. There's $836 million. So there's a big relationship between that part of the pie, and then the previous pie where it talks to community social services, because a lot of the money in that. But Wendy, do you know the exact percentage, or at least the ballpark percentage of how much of that $700 million in community social services is directly funded from the Fed provincial contribution?
Yeah, approximately 80%.
And it's prescribed funding for specific programs and services that we're legislated to provide, correct?
That's exactly it. Yeah.
So what's the overall budget? We have our budget is $3.94 billion for 2021. What's the overall percentage of our budget that is actually maneuverable from a council perspective?
I'm gonna go back to, I think it's around less than 6%.
Yeah.
So if we look at, I just changed the slide here. If we look at sort of the support services, the finance, the HR, and the IT, if you actually pare that down, it's about 3% there that has significant discretion to it.
Yeah, so there are a lot of parts of the budget that we don't have discretion on. I mean, that's a good slide there. I think that's the newest slide this year, so I haven't seen that one before. So that's good. Okay, so yeah, you can leave the slides up just to see if the individual who asked to put the slides back up, if there was a slide they wanted to see in particular. So happy to leave the slides up. If you want to mention them, feel free to let me know. Another question here: do we have a sense already of what capital projects would be planned for our wards or do we wait until November 3rd for the details? Essentially, we have a revolving list of priorities. So we have a pretty decent idea, councillors will, of what's to come. We get a 5-year capital works projected sort of program list that we work off of. So we'll have a general idea what's to come, but we don't know for certain until we get that budget document out and can say. So often we will talk about what might be projected to be done in the coming years. We usually get a scope of about maybe, a project will be 2 to 3 years, or 3 to 5 years, or 4 to 7 years within that capital works program. But until we get the actual budget in front of us, we don't know exactly which projects are in there. So when the budget is tabled on November 3rd, then we will have that specific list. And I know myself, I know we try to share as much of that information as possible right off the bat. I imagine Councillor Darouze does the same. George?
Yeah, no, thank you. That's exactly it. And then we have an idea, but it will be better for us when we table the budget on November 3rd. We'll have a word by word, a full detail on what we're getting, and it's in our priority, and we can release it to the public. And at that time, we can have also some conversation around that.
Yeah, because obviously we want. I mean, I've been waiting for say something as trivial. Well, it's not trivial to the community, but the repaving of the cars recreation area, the parking lot. It's been kind of slated for years, and it's supposed to happen in 2022. But until I see it in the book, I can't really go say it's actually happening. So I need to know. I need to have a bit more certainty, and the budget documents, when they are tabled, do give us that certainty.
For sure.
All right. So I don't have. Here we go. What percentage of the overall budget is allotted to rural wards? I will say this: we don't generally do a ward by ward budget. But Wendy, I don't know if you can comment on that any further.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Actually, no, we don't cut the budget up or report the budget on that basis. So I don't think I can give you a good answer.
Yeah, we've done, in the past, we've done some calculations on exactly what comes into the ward, but every year is different because it's all based on priorities. We've had years where West Carleton March might get the lion's share of renewal funding for roads or for rural road upgrades, but then the following year maybe it goes to Osgoode, or maybe it goes to Cumberland or to Ward 21. So it's not exact science every year. Not every ward gets the exact same amount of money every year, but it is generally proportionate. It's generally fair. I've never seen a situation where we aren't getting our fair share. There are certain things that are skewed a bit. The stormwater fee is something rural residents don't generally want to talk about, but it actually is. The stormwater budget is an odd budget where more money is spent in the rural area from that budget than is what is actually collected from the stormwater fee that funds that budget. It's actually heavily subsidized by urban residents. And then there's other budgets, right? So there's the transit services budget. Not a single resident of Osgoode, the former Osgoode Township, pays toward the transit services budget. Same with North Core residents. So, or if you live out in Ashton, you don't pay for it, just based on the transit service boundary. But residents in Manotick and Richmond, they'll pay another budget, which is the rural transit area rate A, which pays for the sort of moderate service that they get in those communities. But then in the urban area, folks are paying 7, 8 times, 9 times the amount that rural residents are paying for transit. And it's all just based on that user sort of pay system that they fund they fund the service that they get. But yeah, there is no exact calculation of revenue versus expenditures ward by ward, unfortunately. Rural transit was one of the questions. So yeah, so rural transit, we've never actually updated that, which is interesting. The rural transit boundary, it's been modified slightly around the urban boundary, but for the most part, it has not been touched since before amalgamation. All the previous municipalities, the 11 municipalities within the RMOC, the Regional Municipality of Ottawa Carleton, they all agreed on a certain boundary for transit service. So I know in in our ward, in Ward 21, the boundary is out to Dwyer Hill Road. So it actually goes quite far west of Stittsville, west of Richmond. And then it comes down around Richmond and kind of makes its way over along Century Road, McBean down to Century, and then down to Manotick to cover Manotick. Everything south of Manotick is outside of the rural transit area. Prior to amalgamation, Osgoode Township was not one that paid into transit, didn't get transit service, of course, as a result. And then most of Cumberland Ward, if not all of Cumberland Ward, is actually within the rural transit area rate A. So there's A and B. Every single resident of the city of Ottawa pays for paratranspo. So if you're in rural transit area B, and that'll come up on your taxes, let's say RTAB, you pay a fee toward paratranspo. And then if you're in A, so CARP, Richmond, Manotick, all of Cumberland, you pay RTA-A. But we've done some calculations because we often get questions about, with growth in Manotick, growth in Richmond, are you going to provide more service? Stittsville, not long ago, actually moved entirely out of the RTA into the urban transit area. And I think on average, their taxes went up on that from about $130 a year to $800 a year. And that's about 7 years ago now or so. So it's been a few years. I've done some calculations in Manotick. If that were to happen in Manotick, you would see on average per home $1,000 increase in your taxes, because if you get transit, every single person pays for transit, regardless of who uses it. So it's been a tough one because we do get some demand here and there, but the demand needs to be significant because there's no opt-out. If you bring in heavy transits into an area, every resident has to pay for it. So it's something that hasn't been looked at significantly in my time in office, even though we do get a handful of comments every now and then on better transit. My expectation is that when LRT does open in Riverside South, that you could see maybe a higher increase for demand from communities like Greeley and Manotick because of the proximity, the easy access. How can we service that? Can we run sort of direct busing from Manotick directly to the LRT line and hop people on directly? But we'll see what happens when that opens and move on from there. Yeah, so just a comment on that. Perhaps we should start thinking differently about transit and look at different options than OC Transpo. So interestingly enough, the paratranspo piece, and I know that's not OC Transpo, it's paratranspo, but the paratranspo piece, a few years ago, we stopped running paratranspo in the rural area. It was from rural to rural trips. We stopped doing it. And what we did was we actually started taking the money that was allocated to paratranspo every year for rural to rural trips, and we provided it to the local community service organizations. So Rural Ottawa South Support Services, Eastern Ottawa Resource Center, as well as West Ottawa Community Resource Center. So the three of them would run that service themselves. The reason why we did that is because they could do more with the amount of money than we were doing. So they could actually provide a better service. There's still paratranspo runs between the urban area and the rural area, but the rural to rural trips are all through those community resource centers. And it's seemingly, I think it works for the most part. I know Ross has been quite busy. I know for Councillor Darouze and myself, Ross is the one that covers our area. So yeah, I think George knows quite a bit about Ross's impact in the ward too. So
yeah, amazing. And I see Kelly is also Dumas is on the attendee, and I want to thank her and thanks all the effort. I know they've been servicing our rural area, especially our senior and the resident, in an amazing way. So especially during COVID, and they've done an amazing job. So thank you very much for that.
Yes, thank you. Yes, absolutely. In terms of other options, though, I know we used to have a Kempville service that stopped running. Ideally, we'd love to have better options, but it's been tough. I know before I was elected, we had a service that ran through Cars and North Gore and Carlton Golf and Yacht Club. I think we had 8-9 regular users, but every resident in that community was paying for it. So there was a big push to get rid of that bus. So it's that demand versus who's paying for it. And it's often such a discrepancy that that ends up being controversial in the rural area. Quite often people say, well, I moved out here, I knew there was no transit. But some people still, we know, rely on transit. So yeah, I think it'd be great if there was some other options that we could look at that would be beneficial to the rural area. But without that high demand, it's tough for us to be able to really dive into that anymore. I mean, like I said, even in Manitouk and Richmond, it's only been a handful of emails over the years, 11 years in office, for better service there. Someone made a bit of a joke in the chat box saying, when or if transit runs again. How dare you? It'll run. We're working on it. We have groups. We have our independent safety group out there, and we have staff working hard at the main issue of this. And this is people talk about RTG all the time. The main issue is Alstom. Alstom hasn't put in the effort that they should be doing to getting those trains running. What's wild is that if you look at the previous bids, it was either Alstom or Bombardier. One would say, oh, we should have gone with Bombardier. Alstom recently bought Bombardier. So it's no matter which way we went, we were going to be dealing with Alstom at some point, and we need them to be better. There's no question. I mean, that's the key thing for us to be able to get that thing up and running and better, is that Alstom steps up and does their job, but that hasn't been happening as we would like it. Okay.
Do you have a new question, I think?
Yeah, I'm seeing that here. So could you please review the information related to any proposed increases to city staff salaries? When did you want to talk about salaries and collective bargaining and all that good stuff?
Sure. So generally what we do when we're preparing the budget is we put a provision in for increases. We call it COLA, cost of living, and collective bargaining settlements at 2%. We've only had one settle so far. I believe it's QP, and it came in a little bit lower than that. So we'll obviously make some adjustments, and we've got a few more that are outstanding. I believe it's CIPP and a couple of other small unions. With ATU, the collective agreement was negotiated for 5 years. So I think we're still moving into year 3 of that one, and it's under 2%. So whatever those increases are, we just build them in.
Yeah, and I know over the years too, we made some decisions in the past. We had a number of we held the line on staff for many years. I think we saw it increase by the 4 years prior to 2010 when I got elected. We had an increase of 1,000 employees over those years during Larry O'Brien's time in office. And then we did keep it. We kept it sort of status quo for a number of years. We saw a reorg in 2016, which saw a big change to our, not just our staff, but also our management. I think it saved us about $20 million annually. But as pressures come in, we have growth, of course, and requires more staff in certain areas to make sure that we're still plowing the roads and still getting out there and mowing the ball diamonds and soccer fields. Question now about, could you talk about the impact of COVID on the budget? I know Wendy, there's no other topic she loves to talk about more than the impact of COVID on the budget.
It's a great question. And I talked a little bit about the COVID hangover in the presentation. And so our view is that things will actually get a little bit better next year as we come out of the pandemic, but we will have some impacts. I know transit is, I think, perhaps a little less important for folks in the rural areas, but we will see lower ridership as a result of COVID and that kind of flowing into next year. And I say that because there will be fewer people who are returning to their offices, largely downtown, and or working on a kind of a hybrid model. So they're working at home or in the office part-time. So that will have some impacts. And then we're going to see some continued pressures. I think sort of the biggest ones in our parks and recreation area, where we're not necessarily expecting people to come back as strong or at 100% of all of the services that we have to offer. So I mean, some of our fees will be lower there, and some of our miscellaneous fees that we have at the city as well. So what we've done over the last 2 years, so in 2020 and 2021, we're very fortunate. We've received funding through other levels of government through the Safe Restart Agreement, which allowed us to balance our budgets and make us whole. And in fact, in 2020, we had a surplus of approximately $20 million. We're expecting a small surplus for 2021. And that money we will use as our mitigation to fill some of those holes for next year. So as we build our budget, we will use our surpluses that we've tucked away in the reserves to be able to offer the same level of services to our residents.
Thank you. So on the subject of surpluses, I mean, as we know, the city cannot carry a deficit from year over year. We have to have a balanced budget. It's by law. Of course, upper levels of government can deficit all they want, but municipalities cannot. But the question is, what is the current city debt and what's the interest paid on said debt? Oh, you're on mute there, Wendy. Unless you just don't want us to hear the answer.
Right, I think I'm off mute. Oh.
You're good now.
I'm toggling between 3 screens, so you've got me with the technology here tonight. I think our debt, and don't quote me, sits around, I think it's 2.9 billion. We are under the thresholds that are set by council. So council sets debt at, I believe it's 7.5%, which is a mix between our tax and rate. And the percentage is actually around 5%. So we're actually under that threshold. The province allows us to carry debt up to 25% of our own source revenue. So we're well under that. So we manage it accordingly. We will have some new debt issued as we move into the next few years, really financing the next stage of LRT and some of our other miscellaneous projects when you look at some of those capital works and things like that. I do not have the interest offhand, so I'd have to dig that one up for you.
Okay, so whoever asked that question, by all means, you can contact myself or Councillor Darouze by email, and we're happy to try to follow up with that and get that question answered for you. I know, just while we're on the topic, where are reserves at?
7, I think it's in the slide.
Our tax stabilization reserve is currently sitting at, or projected to be at, I believe it's 54 million by the end of the year. We had done a reserve study in 2018, and we're actually nearing the top of what was recommended by the independent firms. So they're sitting in a nice spot. And as I said, we'll be leveraging some of those reserves as we build the budget out for next year. So that's going to help us as we kind of come out of the COVID pandemic.
Because I think it's always generally, good frame of mind to have, or a good rule of thumb to have, 10% your annual budget in reserves. And if I'm not mistaken, we have around $400 million is overall across our reserve accounts, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So if you look at all of the things that we have tucked away, absolutely. So we have restricted reserves and unrestricted reserves. So the ones that we can't touch, you're correct. It's about 400 billion. Okay.
All right, thanks. The next question, comment and a question. So the rural area thanks you for hiring extra paramedics. I know Councillor Darouze was heavy on that in the last couple of years in the budget. Will there be any funds allocated for bringing on any more?
I can answer that, Scott.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. The question is very important. Since 2011, back in the days, council freeze hiring of paramedic at that time. But since 2014, we brought money from the reserve, and we've been hiring at approximately between 12 to 14 paramedic. And we really adjusted all the CTAS 1 and 2 and 3. And those are the call that we get from resident in the rural area, of course, for an emergency time. And then we improve the service to 11 minutes per specifically on the CTAS 1. And we haven't stopped hiring since then. And in this budget 2022, also you'll see when the budget tabled, and you'll see it out, you'll see another FTEs, 14 of them in the budget through CPS, and then we're hiring those in the 2022. Of course, it takes 6 months for us to put paramedic on the force, and that's why we're trying to making sure that we hire every year. But our problem with paramedics most of the time is like Scott and I, we talk about it all the time. It is also the release at the hospital. So we have issues, and we've been advocating with the premier and with the hospitals, because they hold our paramedic hostage most of the time. and we're hoping this issue will be resolved very soon with the effort of our government, with the provincial government and our hospitals. So I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, thanks. And I know that you hear like acronyms all the time. So CTAS 1, there's CTAS 1 through 5. It's the Canadian Triage and Acuity Scale, and it ranks the severity of the call. So they'll rank it when they do the 911 calls, and they deploy their paramedics based on that ranking and the criteria as to where it fits from 1 on a scale of 1 to 5. And then we have to monitor all that and ensure that we're hitting a standard response time. All right, another question. So thank you. Should the city be funding the 3rd phase of LRT when the 2nd phase is not working? Okay, so the 1st phase is not working. Stage 1 is not currently working. Stage 2 is under construction. So stage 2 has not yet opened. The southern line of stage 2, I believe, is slated to open at the end of 2022. And then the eastern line, I believe, is 2024. And the western line out to Moody Drive and down to Baseline Station is 2025. The eastern line is all the way to Trim Road. That's stage 2. The city will not be funding stage 3. The city does not have the money in the budget or in the projected budget over the course of the next 10 years to fund stage 3. We have been clear that if stage 3 is to go ahead to Stittsville, Canada, and Barrhaven, it'll have to be funded by our upper levels of government. And we have seen some commitments to that front, but obviously until the money is actually secured, there is no advancement of stage 3. So the city is not funding stage 3 at this point. Next question. Can you speak to the scope of the upcoming road renewal projects for the wards, as well? Have there been any discussion on the level of quality of the road renewal process, so that the roads need to be refreshed less often? Currently, it seems we're buying, well, that's just an analogy. Currently, it seems we're buying a $20 pair of shoes that last 2 months rather than spending $80 for the pair that lasts the year to keep yearly costs down. It's a good analogy. Yeah, so I don't know if I can answer that second part of the question. So the upcoming road renewal projects, that'll be confirmed when the budget comes out. When the budget gets tabled next month, the list of road renewal projects will be in that budget. If you have questions about long-term, Councillor Darouze and I can actually provide you a list of projects that are slated for renewal in the coming years. There's actually even a map. If you actually just Google search Ottawa construction projects, it'll take you to the City of Ottawa. You'll be able to find a link to the City of Ottawa website. You can actually find an infrastructure and a construction map, which shows you projected roads being done over the next 1, 2, up to 7 years. So you can look that up, but we don't confirm it until we get it right in the budget and then approve the budget. In terms of the road renewal process, I don't have an answer on that. That's a question more for infrastructure services folks. I know we've talked about this type of thing before, but yeah, I don't have an answer. I can't answer that right now. So I don't have the sender is. Again, so for that question, if you want to send me an email, send an email to myself or to Councillor Darouze, and we can follow up and get you an answer on that. Okay, moving on.
Scott, just a small comment that the question themes are coming from me. I just want to make sure to remind the attendee that it's not me. I know I'm well diverse.
Don't worry, the public can't see that. Only you and me can see that, George.
Okay.
There's a weird snafu with our system tonight where everything seems to be George Darouze.
I know. It's okay. I just want to make sure.
So how does city staff know we are in a COVID pandemic hangover when we are approaching winter and cases are likely to go up? How will this affect the city budget? Wendy, are you talking or are you just on mute?
No, I'm just looking for the mute button.
Okay,
sorry.
Okay.
So we're just looking at, we've got a projection to the end of the year, and Ottawa Public Health is basically running the response to the pandemic at this time. So we've retracted what we call our Emergency Operations Center. It was sort of being run by the city, and public health has taken that over and continuing that response till the end of the year. I mean, it will all be based on science and obviously case counts and facts as to what's happening. I think what I've heard most recently is where we were seeing that bubble in the case counts going up, things are starting to retract and go down again. And then it's just a question of, is there another wave that's going to come in the first quarter of 2022. And when I talked about some of those pieces that will flow into 2022 with respect to the impact on our service offerings, and I'm going to say the uptake of people using some of our services, those are the pieces that we're incorporating into our budget. So when you see it tabled, we know we're going to have some reduced fees as a result of not having 100% of, I'm going to say, everyone coming back to everything that we're offering. So that's sort of that hangover piece that I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was around this time last year that we thought we were doing well out of the summer, we got into the fall, and then of course we did see a spike after Thanksgiving, dip down just before Christmas, then right back up, and then we were straight into lockdown for a number of months after Christmas. But of course, this time last year, nobody had a vaccination in them, and we're looking at communities. I mean, Richmond is one of the top communities in the entire city, 94.4% with one shot. So 89.9% fully vaccinated in the Richmond area, which is Richmond, and then up into Northern Goulburn. And then, we have, I think, 87% in the Munster area, 91%. This is one dose in Manotick. I think those numbers are very similar as you move into Osgoode, out into Cumberland. The VARS area is 100.2% vaccinated.
Yeah.
Which means people outside of VARS have gone into that area to get vaccinated and they get counted. But it's so we do have some high vaccination rates in this area, and I think that's really going to help us fend off any potential future waves. But I think we're lucky in that regard. Ottawa is quite high. I think Ottawa has one of the highest vaccination rates in the world. So that just to follow up on that one, it sort of meant just the cost of. Okay. So the cost for COVID clinics. Comment saying I've worked at many, and some I am there 8 hours with 2 people showing up. What is the cost for the city for clinics where people don't show up? Right. So as we try to get, we're still trying to get those numbers up to, because I mean, I mentioned the percentages. We have communities down here that are still only 75%. We need them to get out, so we need to keep on holding these vaccination clinics. But obviously, we're going to get less and less people attending them, but the staff time is still there. So Wendy, on that, so how are we factoring that cost versus the benefit of providing those costs, knowing that the uptake isn't as high as it was before?
I know it's a really great question. Over time, what you're seeing is the number of clinics that we're holding and the locations is starting to retract, right? They're growing smaller and smaller across our communities. And one of the benefits that we've seen is the province has stepped up and they are covering 100% of the cost of our vaccine clinics. And all of the services kind of wrapped around that. So for the city, there's no impact. I mean, yes, we incur them, but the province is reimbursing us for those costs. So if that flows into 2022, then the province will continue to reimburse us for those costs. But we know that they're going to cover everything for 2021.
That's good.
Also on that note, just so you know that the municipality cannot go on a deficit at the end of the year. And last year, we really appreciate the help of the provincial and federal government for us to be able to deal with COVID and extra expenses that OPH, and of course, because we have a lower ridership in OC Transpo and we have expenses in OPH, and then the government has been really contributing and helping our city. Other than that, Wendy can probably add to this. We won't be able to finish our fiscal year without deficit. So just the province has been great helping us and paying most of the expenses, especially on the OPH level, front end.
Thank you, Councillor Darouze. Thank you, Wendy. I'm not seeing any further questions. It's almost 7:30 right on the dot. We did say it was going to go to 7:30. Obviously, we could have stayed here till midnight if people had a litany of questions. I mean, we've been in council all day. I'm going to be in planning committee for about 12 hours tomorrow, but always happy to answer questions. This is actually the better part of the day. So, yeah, so seeing no questions, I can start to wrap up, but if any questions come in, obviously we'll answer them, but we appreciate those who attended. There's about 4 times the amount of people here than last year. Last year was a very quiet session. I think we had 2 folks with their cameras on, and I think they asked a few questions each, but it was, it's always good. I mean, even if we're only reaching a couple people here and there, it's always appreciated to be able to come out and have you attend and ask questions and be able to get those questions answered. And then the nice thing now, I mean, we used to host these in person, and you know, the benefit of the session is great for the people who attend, but there's no long-term benefit. But now there is, because we can record these meetings and anyone can go back and revisit them over time, which I think is one of the positives that we've learned through COVID is it's created some opportunities for better communication. I think we've done that through a variety of ways. I know myself with we started doing our podcast, and it's helped get some information out there. And it's something that we weren't doing before COVID. So I think there's been some benefits, negatives, obviously, a lot of those, but communication wise, I think it's taught some councillors new ways to communicate and to engage. And I think through Zoom to do this in this format and then to be able to preserve that and post that online, I think is a huge benefit. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you, Wendy Stephenson, our amazing Chief Financial Officer at the City of Ottawa. And Councillor Darouze, do you want to say any closing comments?
Thank you very much, Scott. No, I really appreciate the presentation tonight, and I appreciate the attendee. Of course, they had a very good questions, and hopefully we answer most of the question. But I encourage you, if there is a question we didn't answer and you have more that you thought about after, please email myself or Councillor Moffatt, who will be more than happy to engage Wendy in the answers and give you the best answer that we can. In the meantime, I hope that you guys have a great evening, and I want to really appreciate our staff for helping, and of course, Wendy and your staff and your team for making this happen. And Scott, I really appreciate, as usual, every year you and I will do the public consultation together to help our communities. So thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you. And we have, so this budget will go live. We'll table the budget on the 3rd of November. It goes to full council in December. Over the course of November, it will go to the various committees, including all the ones that I chair, and we'll have an opportunity to speak to it there. So you know, if you have questions on transportation, on issues in the rural area, you can come to Agricultural Rural Affairs Committee. There's the Finance and Economic Development Committee. Environment Committee budget obviously is always a big one of interest for folks, which we have there. So plenty of opportunities to engage on this. And interestingly enough, it's the last budget of the term. So this is our last opportunity to talk about budgets until after the next election. So again, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, George. Thank you, Wendy. And thank you to all of you. Enjoy the rest of your night.
Thank
Good
you all.
night. Thank you.
Good night.